Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm here with my friend and today co-host from the New Atlas, Brian Berletic. How's it going today, Brian?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back.
Brian, let's jump right into it. There's so many things going on today. First, I want to pat you and I on the back, but not too long. We called it just like it happened with the attack on Iran. What do you think is on the mind of the neocons now that they see that they will have a harder time trying to subjugate and subdue Iran?
Well, I just want to point out the reason we were right is because, and I have it right here, they literally wrote their entire plan down on a piece of paper 16 years ago, the Which Path to Persia document by the Brookings Institution. Absolutely every single aspect of this that we have watched play out over the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, Biden, and now Trump again. Everything from using fake negotiations as cover to a chapter literally titled "Leave It to Bibi, Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike." The idea of using the Israeli strike and provocation to precipitate a war the U.S. could then wade into. Absolutely all of this was laid out in that document 16 years ago. We have been shouting from a mountaintop, warning people that President Trump was going to continue absolutely all of this, not just in regards to Iran, but into regards to Russia and also China and absolutely everybody in between and even beyond places like the continent of Africa and Latin America. So it's very important for people to understand if they did not see this coming. The reason why is because they're looking in the wrong place to guide their understanding of how all of this works. Look at the policy papers that we're talking about. That is the plan. I want to talk about another plan, Project 2025, which we've referenced many times. That maybe we'll do that a little bit later. But to answer your question about the neocon warmongers that President Trump has surrounded himself with in his administration and ultimately whose interests he serves, these corporations, they are the ones with this neocon agenda, and they have these neocon representatives in Washington carrying it out, also selling it to the public. I would be very careful about underestimating the menace and threat the U.S. poses to Iran. Yes, they launched this war. Maybe they had hoped for a quick knockout. They cannot afford a long, protracted conflict with Iran. But what I think we're seeing is the very same, model that they used to gradually dismember Syria, weaken, undermine, and dismember Syria. They also used a very similar process against Iraq, although in 2003 there was a full-scale invasion. But people have to remember it actually started in the 1990s with Operation Desert Shield and then Desert Storm, and then periodically bombing Iraq to diminish its military capabilities before the all-out invasion in 2003. We also had, if you look at the history of all of these conflicts, the overthrow of the Libyan government in 2011, the U.S. have been working on that for decades. They have been trying to overthrow Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi for decades. As soon as he came into power, they were funding terrorists, using sanctions. They carried out military strikes on Libya, and all over all of this time, they were whittling away at Libya's stability, prosperity, military capabilities until the opportunity presented itself to topple it all together. So this is the plan that they're going to pursue with Iran from this point forward. I warn people against being overly optimistic or celebrating what has happened. This is not a peace. This is not a ceasefire. This is merely a pause.
And to piggyback off of what you said, we go back to Syria, we go to Libya, as you say, we go to Somalia, we go to Venezuela. Everywhere you look where America has had a hiccup or a roadblock, you see her doubling down, and her policy to overthrow them, she just recalibrates and uses some covert mean of trying to bring them down. Do you think that Iran should now be more wary of how they deal with the empire and all of the international institutes that Iran and that the U.S. and the West uses to subjugate and to suppress opposition and nations?
Absolutely. This is a wake-up call, an important lesson to learn from. on the Iranian part, but also on the part of the rest of the world that is fighting for an alternative system to U.S. primacy over the planet. Iran's security, operational security alone is so fundamentally flawed. I cannot believe that they had military commanders and senior scientists, part of a key central national program, living in civilian residences, that they could just come up with anti-tank missiles, shoot straight through the wall of the concrete apartment building and burn alive everybody inside. I cannot believe that that was even made possible. These people should be on bases, in protected facilities. There should be a wide sweeping security perimeter around these facilities. You should not be able to get close enough to these people to just shoot a missile through the side of wherever they're sleeping and kill them all in the middle of the night. That should not be possible. And yet it was. And I have no idea why the security was so lax. If you look at the secretive, covert nuclear programs in China back during the Cold War, or in North Korea, the secrecy, the security, the seriousness with which they protected these programs, that is what you need, because the U.S. is going to come after you with everything that they have. And if you're not prepared, they will dismantle your program, and you will fail as a state. And so it's high stakes, and I hope that they learned a lesson there. Also, the ballistic missiles, I think, were a good investment. I think realistically, that was the best way the Iranians could array their military to counter the strengths of the U.S. and its Israeli proxies. We saw how effective it was, but it could be more effective. The fact that their air defense systems were scoped out and suppressed by U.S.-Israeli operations, and then in turn, this suppressed missile launches, that is a serious problem. They need to evaluate and overcome, and I think they need to reconsider, if they aren't already doing this quietly, alliances with nations like Russia and China and North Korea, nations that have prevailed over attempts by the U.S. to collapse them and subordinate and subjugate them. I think they all need to stick together. This is not the type of thing that you just do on your own. You're not going to succeed if you do. And of course, we already know that there is cooperation between all of these nations. I believe if there is room for more cooperation, that they should explore those options.
And Brian, why do you think this gets left out of a lot of discussions, that the empire is fighting for its life right now, and the time is not on its side, and it is trying its best to prevent the emergence of a fairer world order, or the global south, and therefore it won't yield? Why is it so hard for people to understand that this is not just an attack on Iran, but this is an attack on China, on Russia, BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all of the Latin American organizations, the African Union? Why is it so hard for people to connect those dots, to understand that when it comes to the empire, her tentacles are everywhere, and she understands that she has to do these things in order to keep the empire going?
Well, that is exactly right. And this is because people are missing this, because they're listening to political rhetoric, which is deliberately designed to mislead and misinform people and to sway people in the wrong direction. We constantly refer to these policy papers. We make the links to them available. A lot of these papers are publicly available. They weren't leaked. They were made public, so that the plans are out there. And they depend on American people ignoring that. 170 pages of academic English talking about complex subjects most Americans don't understand very well, versus just listening to appealing rhetoric coming out of a slick politician. They are very confident that Americans and people around the globe, more times than not, are going to choose that rhetoric over the reality that is, again, on these policy papers. And you're absolutely right. We have been talking about this forever. We have been talking about how the U.S. is behind schedule. They're rushing. They see the window of opportunity closing to reassert primacy over the planet. And they're reckless, they're desperate, and they're extremely dangerous. That's what we just watched, this attack on Iran. This is something that ideally they probably would have wanted to launch under more ideal conditions. They have no more time. they see China rising exponentially, and they understand that they need to complete this pivot from their proxy war against Russia through Ukraine to a similar conflict with China in the Asia Pacific. They needed to weaken or severely destroy Iran on the way over to the Asia Pacific. They need to avoid being mired in the Middle East. And then they have this uphill battle to fight against China itself. And they're putting all of the pieces together. They're rushing this very quickly. Look at how they did this. We lived through the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. We remember them taking all of this time to go to the UN, to pretend that they were going through the whole process, to legitimize it, to justify it, to create a sufficient pretext for it. They did none of that. They had President Trump say, I don't care what U.S. intelligence says. I don't care what the intelligence is. We're bombing Iran. That's what we're doing. And then he played a music video after he bombed Iran in tribute to longtime warmonger, neocon, Senator John McCain, who's now dead. But that was something that he, in public, at a podium, sang to the public. These are psychopaths, sociopathic people who belong nowhere near power, and yet they have their hands on the most powerful nation, economy, and military. It is in decline. They know it. They're desperate, and they're extremely dangerous. And now we see how this is manifesting itself. Contrary to everybody's hope that President Trump was going to fight the deep state, it's very clear that he's an eager servant of the deep state.
And another thing, what are your thoughts on this, Brian? Trump initiates the war with Iran. He begs for a pause in the war with Iran, and then he gets nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and yet he is still allowing weapons to be funneled to Ukraine to fight Russia. How, in the sane world, how is that even possible?
Well, the Nobel Peace Prize has always been a joke. Serial war criminals have been the recipients. Obvious U.S. sock puppets have received it. Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar, for example, is a creation of U.S. and British intelligence de facto installed into power before the military in Myanmar ousted her regime, which was literally run by there were white guys just walking around Myanmar as her administrators and de facto ministers, like British viceroys just strutting through old-time Burma back in the age of the British Empire. And she has a Nobel Peace Prize. And so all of these horrible people, the Peace Prize is just a way to whitewash these people, to present a horrible person as a good person to the public. They are manufacturing legitimacy as much as they are manufacturing consent for their many wars of aggression. So it doesn't surprise me at all that there's this talk of a Nobel Peace Prize for President Trump, who has taken every single war that he was handed by the Biden administration, has continued all of them, expanded them actually, and now has started new wars that the Biden, Obama, and Bush Jr. administrations could only have dreamed of starting during their time in office. So it's continuity of agenda, just as we warned.
And what do you think that this has done to his base? Because he's always trumpeted Joe Biden. These are Joe Biden wars. Joe Biden, if I had been president, this would not have happened. And now we see that, as you said, not only has he continued on with their wars, but he's expanded it, and he is looking to expand them even further. So what do you think that has done to his MAGA base, the part of the base that said they voted for him because they wanted no more foreign wars and military entanglements around the world?
7 months ago, I produced a video warning people that this is exactly what was going to happen. This was before President Trump actually was inaugurated as U.S. president. And I said, people in his support base are going to be divided into two camps. One camp is the camp of anger, realizing that they have been duped, anger. And these are people with courage and integrity who will admit that they made a mistake placing their support in President Trump. And they will be angry and they will oppose his policies. You will have the other camp, which is the camp of delusion. And these are people who will descend into increasing layers of delusion to try to explain how somehow they were still right, even though they are completely and continuously wrong. And we see examples of both of this in the general public, even within the alternative media, people who are applying these 10D interdimensional chess moves that they think President Trump is executing, which just coincidentally looks like continuity of agenda that everyone warned about and that is detailed in these policy papers. So, it's a combination of things. They don't want to be wrong. They have pride. They have ego that is overwhelming their conscience and their ability to do the right thing no matter what. It's human nature, and they're caving into it, which is extremely unfortunate. Unfortunately, there is a certain segment of the Trump support base who, I don't know how else to describe it, they're just racist idiots. And they have much joy and hope that the U.S. will wage these wars against, brown people around the globe who they think deserve to be bombed and subjugated by American primacy. And these people, you can see, they're very happy and very proud that the United States bombed Iran. And you have to think about it from the American point of view of these type of people. What is going on in the U.S.? Nothing. They're not building anything. They're not going anywhere. The country is literally rotting out from underneath them. And the only thing that they have to be proud of or look forward to is destroying somebody else's country. And unfortunately, the U.S. has created this mindset, and they are deliberately cultivating it to create a support base for these forever wars that we see are still being waged under the Trump administration.
What do you think about the leadership in the U.S.? Do you think that they are reflecting on the all of the missteps that they've made? Because desperation breeds desperate acts. And as you pointed out, 30 years ago, America would have put on this front and went before the UN. But now we see that as time moves on, they're becoming more desperate, and they're just resorting to pure power and piracy and all around the world. And it's starting to alienate even more people. So they're trying to force people to stay on board of the so-called rules-based order, but the mask is coming off, and it is showing her the empire as it is. Do you think that the leadership of the U.S. and the West are reflecting on it, or they're just insane and they're just trying to keep their rule?
Yeah, they're just sprinting at this point. It's just a mad sprint. They're going to focus on that percentage, whatever it is. Unfortunately, I think it's a pretty high percentage of the Western public, not just the American public, the Western public that they have cultivated to be irrational, racist, belligerent, angry at the rest of the world, to blame the rest of the world for all of their own ills, even though it's their own government and own special interests that have created the conditions they think is China's fault. Oh, China, look at their beautiful cities and their infrastructure, world-class infrastructure. They took that from us. No, you never had anything like that. And you never will have anything like that as long as you allow these people to lie to you into thinking China somehow is the reason you don't have those nice things. You could have those nice things. Your nation spends trillions of dollars on wars overseas. China has risen this 21st century without firing a single shot at another country or invading another country. Is unprecedented in human history. The rise of a global superpower without waging war and invading others and taking what they have. They built that on their own. That is unique. It is an example set for the rest of the world. If Americans could see through the propaganda that's blinding them, they would see China not as some sort of enemy that they inevitably have to go to war with. They would see China as an example to follow if they want to enjoy all of these same things. And so it's unfortunate, but yes, I think we're just watching a mad dash. These people are extremely dangerous. I recommend that people do not underestimate how dangerous they are, their capacity for death and destruction around the world, and their capacity to sacrifice their proxies, of which they have many. I think we will eventually talk about Europe and the 5% of their GDP they will now be spending on arms, ammunition, just as President Trump said that they would, as Secretary Hegseth said back in February, they would. They are now doing that. They will go through these proxies. Then they will have the American people themselves pay the price. The people actually driving these policies will be the very last people to pay the consequences for them. So this is incredibly dangerous. And we've watched this one before, history-wise.
before we, because I was getting ready to talk about Europe, but one last thing on Iran. Do you believe that Iran should entertain negotiations with the United States? And do you believe that they should allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to continue its inspections in their site after knowingly after finding out that the IEA was the organization that had been infiltrated by the West and was giving the information to the Israelis and the U.S. for targeted assassinations?
Iran has, in good faith, cooperated with the IAEA and also complied to the Non-Proliferation Treaty for years and years and years. And now I think they've demonstrated their good faith to the world. I think they've also made the point that the U.S. is operating in absolute bad faith. And just as you say, they have compromised the treaty, they have weaponized the treaty, and they have weaponized this institution. And so, no, Iran should not be associating with either one of these. They should withdraw from the treaty. They should keep out the IAEA, their inspectors. Again, KJ No, who you had on your show recently, and I heard him speaking elsewhere, was talking about how it's essentially murderers who use the IAEA as a plan to go in and murder and destroy everything in Iran. So no, it would be crazy for them to continue. In terms of negotiations, if they believe that it'll buy them time or continue to demonstrate to the world their good faith regarding these matters, as long as they don't make concessions, as long as they themselves understand that the negotiations are a complete facade for the U.S. and that they will use negotiations as cover to murder and destroy in Iran again as the soonest opportunity that avails itself.
And do you believe that because this has to do, as I bring this question up about Iran, this has to do with the division of labor in Asia and in Europe. Do you think that Iran should be very wary of the negotiations because America is buying time? As we say, the 3 R's in empire: rest, recalibrate, and rearm. And while the United States is talking about bringing them back to the negotiation table, as they did with Hamas, and as they did with Hezbollah, as they did with Syria, we see now the NATO summit that took place in Europe, where they're talking about spending 5% so that they can confront Russia in Europe, so that the United States can then move to its big project, which is China. This division of labor, how do you think it's going to play out, and what do you think this whole meeting in Europe about NATO's 5% rise, what do you think that was all about?
Yeah, so I think at this point it's clear to everybody the continuity of agenda that we see unfolding. This war with Iran was something that the Biden administration had spent all 4 years setting up. We watched President Biden, who wasn't really making any decisions or anything, but at least his administration was overseeing negotiations with Hezbollah, between Hezbollah and Israel, and that's when Israel carried out their decapitation strike on the senior leadership of Hezbollah. So that is a well-established pattern now. The U.S. uses negotiations as cover for killing, death, and destruction. And so that's what people need to understand. The U.S. has no interest in peace, never did, never will. As long as these circles of interest are in power, making decisions, the U.S. will be a belligerent threat to everyone on planet Earth, including the American people themselves. That's very important to understand. We warned that the war with Russia through Ukraine, that was not going to end. President Trump promised he would end it in 24 hours. And even though people say that's hyperbole, he literally could have, because every single aspect of the war is being fought by the U.S. through Ukraine. There are U.S. generals at the top of the Ukrainian chain of command making all of the decisions for the entire war, all of the planning from battlefield-wide strategy all the way down to picking individual targets. Those are U.S. generals at a base in Germany doing all of that. The New York Times revealed that the CIA had taken over all of Ukraine's intelligence agencies. And so when we hear about Ukraine's intelligence agencies striking at Russian strategic bombers with this 18-month-long drone strike that they organized, that was the U.S. intelligence community that did that through the Ukrainian agencies. So we have to understand this was always a U.S. war against Russia. if President Trump was ever serious about ending it, which he never was, but if he was honestly interested in ending it, he's the only one who could end it. He could just pull the plug and it would finish overnight, 24 hours. It could have been done. He didn't want to. He had no intention of doing it. Again, it was just to string the American people along. It was to create false hope, maybe in the minds of at least the public in Russia, maybe create upward pressure on Moscow to negotiate or agree to a ceasefire that the U.S. always designed to use to rush troops in, European troops in, to freeze the conflict, not end it, so that they could put a pin in it, go to China, deal with China, wipe out Iran on the way, and then circle back around and finish off Russia once it was fully isolated from both Iran and China. So this is what we're watching take place. I'm not surprised at all that we're watching Europe completely capitulate to the U.S. Rashid, you and I, we have talked about how Europe is politically captured by the U.S. That is why they make these decisions that do not reflect the European people's best interests. Where's this 5% of the GDP going to defense military spending? What is that going to do to the social programs Europeans depend on for their quality of life? They're going to take that public money and it's going to be diverted to U.S. wars of aggression, proxy wars of aggression in the region and around the world. That's what it's all going to be spent on. That's who's going to pay the price, the European people. And we said this was going to happen, and now it's happening. And again, because they wrote it down in Project 2025, I did a post on this I just posted on X and also on Telegram. And there's a section under the Department of Defense part of Project 2025, increase allied conventional defense burden sharing. And that's literally the word that they're using in Western headlines today, burden sharing with this 5% of the GDP for military spending. And they're talking about transform NATO so that U.S. allies are capable of fielding the great majority of the conventional forces required to deter Russia. And then we remember U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in February talking about donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base. He's talking to Europe in Brussels, and importantly, leveling with your citizens about the threats facing Europe. He's talking about Russia. So he's telling you, Russia is our enemy, and we are going to fight Russia. We're not making peace with Russia. He's telling you this publicly. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree. And now this week, everyone is spending 5%, just as Secretary Hegseth laid out in February. And I watched many analysts who did not want to confront the reality that President Trump represented continuity of agenda, sidestep that speech, that paper, the transcript of which is on the Department of Defense's official website, sidestep that for months and months and months and pretend like it never happened. And now here we are. And that's what happens when you defer to delusion rather than just facing reality, even if it's uncomfortable. That's what happens. You get blindsided by things they told you they were going to do. So very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
So, Brian, what do you think will be the blowback of that? Because when you're stealing money from the people, for sooner or later they get mad and they go to the streets.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I see a lot of things going on in Europe that are being done deliberately to keep Europeans divided and distracted. You see the whole immigration issue. The whole immigration issue is created by Europe's participation in America's wars of aggression around the world. These people are flooding out of countries the U.S. and Europe bombed. And I hear people say, well, this country wasn't involved. You better go check. They are all involved in bombing all of these countries, including Libya. And that was a destination for people fleeing American and European destabilization across the rest of Africa. They fled to Libya, a bastion of peace, stability, and prosperity, where they enjoyed a new life. And Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi warned everyone that if his nation was overthrown, all of these people would flood into Europe. And for people complaining about this, stop blaming these people running for their lives. Blame your government for creating this problem in the first place. Africa is a huge continent, almost infinite resources. There's no reason why people should be fleeing from there, except for the fact the U.S., every time anyone there tries to build something, the U.S. and its European allies knock it over. And they've been doing this for generations. And that is why Africa is the way it is today. We see China trying to change it, and we see the U.S. openly opposed to China helping develop the entire continent. So it's it's going to be a bunch of dirty tricks used to keep people divided, distracted, scared, terrorized, and committed to this change of policy across Europe. And just like Americans have gotten very well used to their tax dollars disappearing into endless wars overseas, Europeans will get used to it. I honestly believe. I don't think there's going to be any sort of serious organization. You'll see protests. They will do it to allow people to blow off steam. A lot of the opposition is all controlled, and they will manage this, and they will get through. Europe will be destroyed in the process. But again, that's the whole reason the U.S. has proxies, to get everyone else to pay the cost of their plans first and foremost. They will be the last ones to pay. The American people will also pay, but the people actually devising this policy and benefiting from it, they will be the very last ones to pay.
And speaking of Africa, you just recently, the Trump administration announced that they were going to be doubling and tripling down in Africa to prevent China and Russia from, in words, coming against their interests. And their interest is to colonize. And so we could look for a lot of destabilization. We could look for a lot of new terror groups to justify America's presence there. And that goes back to what you were saying and what I was saying about the division of labor and how the tentacles of the empire has to be everywhere to keep everybody off balance in order for the empire to maintain its rule. How do you think that is going to work out, especially as we walk into a new paradigm and there's a dawn of a new day where America is not the complete hegemon and does not have the military, the political, or the economic capital to push these things over like he had 30 years ago?
Well, it's hard to tell. I'm focused mainly on Eurasia. You would have to spend a lifetime to understand Africa as a huge continent, many nations, many people, many cultures, tons of history, and it's hard to just do a brief overview of it. But what I will say though is the scale of what China is doing around the world, including in Africa, it is just so massive that I just find it hard to believe the U.S. is going to be able to counter it. And I think one of the reasons why maybe China is not so muscular with its foreign policy is because of just the scale of its development. It's just so massive that the U.S. will burn itself out trying to counter it absolutely everywhere. But they have been having successes, and so we shouldn't also underestimate what the U.S. is capable of. We're watching them seize the Panama Canal, basically, which was transferred over to the nation of Panama in 1999. It was built over a century ago, and the U.S. is still claiming somehow that it belongs to them. And this is exactly what they accuse China of with their Belt and Road Initiative. Oh, you're building them roads and airports, and then you're going to own it forever and control the country forever. You're doing that. You just did that to Panama. You're also doing it to Greenland, where you didn't even build anything at all except the military base. So we have to be very careful of this. They're going exactly as you say. They use terrorism they themselves created as a pretext to station their military. Their military is there to counter development in Africa. And it's an irony that a lot of the, again, I don't know what else to call them, racist idiots that support President Trump and America's endless wars, regardless of who is fighting them. They always have this idea in their head that it's Africa's fault that they aren't developed. It has nothing to do with generations and generations of Western colonialism. Again, knocking anything over that anyone there builds on their own. And they're watching their own government commit openly to a policy of stopping development in Africa. And at the same time, they will use this lack of development as proof that people in Africa are somehow inferior to Americans. And then this sense of superiority that Americans have is what they believe entitles them to do whatever they want anywhere in the world. Things that if any other nation did to the United States, it would be perceived as an act of war. So it really is. It's a combination of just wrecking ball foreign policy plus mentally conditioning the American people to be as inhuman as possible to go along with this. And it's just the perfect storm as empires all throughout history manifest as, and they create all of this harm, and then they overextend themselves, burn out, but it's also up to the rest of the world to continue building this alternative multipolarism. It's up to the rest of the world. It's up to nations like China and Russia to stabilize the continent of Africa, develop it, help these nations finally work their way out from under the shadow of Western colonialism that has been imposed upon them again for centuries now.
John Newells asked a question. He said, question, do you think IRGC, Hezbollah, and Hamas officials are more prone to Israeli assassination because they view martyrdom differently than Westerners, or how are so many taken out?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that a lot of people would think of. But look, when you're waging war against the United States, there's plenty of opportunities to die in war. You don't have to make it easy for them. And taking basic security precautions doesn't mean that you're some sort of coward. It just means you're being strategic. You want to try to last as long as possible to ensure a victorious outcome. So like just dying and then your whole cause collapsing because everybody is dead. That I don't see any sense in that. And I don't really think that plays. I don't really think that plays into their sense of martyrdom. I think what martyrdom, in their perspective, does is creates the bravery you see in Iran to stand up to the U.S. in the first place that other nations around the world will not do. They will not do it because they know it will be uncomfortable for them. Their children won't be able to study in the U.S. or Europe, and so they'll shy away from confronting the U.S., even though in the long run it'll cost them their own self-preservation. So I think that's more of what martyrdom has enabled Iran to do. I think the reason so many of their officials and scientists have died is just because of lack of security that they really need to fix. If you don't want entangling alliances with Russia, China, and North Korea, at least just sit down at a table and ask them about how to set up security at these facilities to keep their scientists and their military leaders from just being so easily killed by Israeli and American operators inside their country using missiles to just punch holes straight through their apartment buildings. It shouldn't be that easy.
Well, some people think that when you and I talk about how crucial Iran is to the Belt and Road Initiative, they think that we're saying that Iran is really indispensable to China. And what we're saying is that for American hegemony, Iran is indispensable for the empire. The empire needs to subjugate Iran so that she can use Iran as a battering ram against China and Russia and even Pakistan and India. It's in some of those papers that they want to do that to them. Why do you think others miss that point, Brian? Because that's a very important point.
You just got to look on a map of where Iran is located, and you have to think to yourself, why is the U.S. so interested in spending 20 years in Afghanistan, which is right next to Iran and Pakistan? And then you have to ask yourself, why is the British Empire so interested in Iran and Afghanistan? So it is strategically located. If you have aspirations of domination over Eurasia, Iran is a key to doing that, and so is Afghanistan. And so this is why the U.S. was involved in both of these places. There's a rail line going from China to Iran. China is buying most of Iran's hydrocarbon exports. It is an important country to China. Is it going to collapse China if it were to be toppled? I don't think so, but it would be a huge setback to multipolarism. It definitely would be. Any nation's loss, Syria's loss, Libya's loss, these were all blows to multipolarism. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And the situation in Iran is to be determined. We just don't know how it's going to play out.
With this pause in the fighting, the real fighting, we know that they're planning behind closed doors. There was some mumblings about right now the United States is delivering more weapons to Israel, as you and I often say, rest, rearm, and recalibrate. 3 R's of empire. Do you think Iran should be talking to Russia and China expediently right now to acquire fighter jets and air defense systems? Because it seems like Iran had Israel on the ropes and they allowed the West to talk them in. The same as with Russia. As Russia had Ukraine on the ropes multiple times, we come with these negotiations, and then it prolongs things. It prolongs death and suffering. Do you think that Iran should be acquiring stuff to counter whatever the United States is given to Israel?
For Russia or China to transfer military systems to Iran, it could take up to several years for these to be properly integrated into their armed forces and used effectively on or over the battlefield. We see that taking place in Ukraine. The U.S. is trying; they have hundreds and hundreds of F-16s at their disposal to send to this disposable a slip there to Ukraine. But Ukraine simply can't absorb them. They don't have the ability to train pilots, ground crews. They don't have the ground infrastructure, the ground support equipment to even use all of these F-16s, even if their pilots were properly trained to use them effectively, which they aren't. In some cases, we have heard that these pilots are crashing them simply because they're not experienced enough to fly them in the first place. And so this would be the same problem Iran would face. Iran has these capabilities, ballistic missiles. What they need to do is more finely tune that capability, other capabilities that they already have. It's much easier to reorganize systems that you have. Of course, yes, if there's an opportunity to acquire warplanes and begin the process, but we have to understand there is a lead time that involves years before those will ever play a role in any sort of conflict. Now, you're talking about the U.S. is already preparing the next phase of fighting against Iran. There's still regime change operations taking place on the ground in Iran right now. That is continuous. The U.S. has continuously pushed regime change for years and years. And again, regardless of who is in the White House, since Bush Jr., even before then. So we have to understand this is not over. This is just a pause in all-out fighting. If you're following the developments closely, Iran is still shooting down drones that are operating in Iran, obviously by U.S.-Israeli interests or proxies are using these drones, still gathering information, still preparing to strike again. So this is far from over, far from over. I think the things that Russia and China could do, North Korea could do, is start thinking about things they can immediately do to threaten the U.S., to draw a red line, threaten the U.S., and enforce the red line to at least create hesitation. Maybe they could do something like that. I don't know. I'm sure they're all talking about it. And we have to remember they have access to information we don't. And so there's things that might seem obvious to us that we think that they should do. But according to the information they have available that we don't, it might be obviously undoable. So we have to keep that in mind also.
You know, Iran has some decent air defense systems. I believe they were jammed and some of them were hit. Do you think it would be wise for Iran to have Russia and China help them to upgrade or to integrate the air defense systems to be a little bit more effective? Because these are Iranian air defense systems, and they've proven themselves against U.S. drones, U.S. warplanes before. And some people are saying that Israel didn't even fly planes into Iran. They flew close to the coast for fear of being knocked down. And what was striking Iran were missiles from drones and stuff. So do you think that it would be wise for them to ask for help to integrate their air defense system to be more proficient and efficient?
Yes, I think, yes, it was probably drones and standoff strikes. That was probably the majority of what was done. The air defense systems, yes, exactly. Well, this is an example of things that Iran has that exist that they could just fine tune and improve. And I think Russia and China could both help in that process. A lot of these systems are all based on legacy Soviet systems. And I think that they could take the lessons that they've learned, say Russia in the proxy war the U.S. is waging against them in Ukraine. They could take that information and help. If they haven't already, maybe they have already. Electronic warfare. There were all kinds of stories about how Russia was helping them with their air defenses and electronic warfare before this conflict even began. So we just hope that cooperation continues. They have learned from this phase of the fighting and that they're better prepared ahead of the next phase.
Do you think Netanyahu will survive this storm of losing this war to Iran? Because there's a lot of discontent. And when you look at the videos that are being released, Iran piled on them. It was censored, but Iran did some serious damage. Even Donald Trump had admitted that that Iran's ballistic missiles were way more effective than they thought they were. And even the defense minister in Israel said that they had underestimated Iran's missile capabilities.
People have to understand, contrary to popular belief, Israel is a proxy of the United States. It really doesn't matter who is in the government. They're going to do whatever the U.S. tells them to do. They're 100% dependent on constant and complete U.S. support to carry out all of the belligerence that they do over the people that they're occupying, and also their neighbors, and even countries like Iran on the other side of the region. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, if he survives or he doesn't, what difference does it make? They'll just find somebody else to put in place, and that person will be equally obedient to the United States. I think there is some time in the future where political stability within Israel, the contradictions that exist, and then this push and pull between U.S. hegemony and multipolarism. Eventually, there will be a pivot in the future. Possibly, there's a possibility. I think people underplay the possibility of that, but I don't think that is now. I don't think that is a factor playing into it now. So I would just assume that Israel, just like Ukraine, is an obedient proxy, and whatever happens politically within this country is more or less irrelevant, because whatever happens, the U.S. will just find somebody else to do what they tell them to do.
What do you think was being said? And I know you have to hypothesize about this, but what do you think was being said between the foreign minister of Iran and Russia, and now the foreign minister of Iran and the leaders in Beijing?
Well, almost certainly they're talking about whatever cooperation is taking place right now, which we don't know about. And this is the thing. People are like, Russia and China aren't helping Iran, but they're not saying that they are. But that doesn't mean that they aren't, because we remember North Korea and Iran helping Russia during the special military operation. It was so secretive, and there was so little evidence of it that we weren't able to determine one way or the other. People say that I said that North Korea wasn't. I said I have no evidence one way or the other. The West has not provided sufficient evidence. Now Russia admits it itself. So I would say that's very compelling evidence that it was taking place. And if that is the case, don't you think it is also the case that Russia and China are helping these other countries as well, and that there's Chinese and Russian cooperation taking place that is unspoken? So we just have to keep that in mind, and that is almost certainly what they're talking about, whatever that level of cooperation actually is, which we're just not privy to.
And do you think the leadership in Beijing, by watching what's going on in Ukraine, watching how the United States is attacking the BRICS one by one, each member, and how they're waging war against Iran, Syria, Palestine, do you think that they are taking the lessons now and preparing for that eventual conflict that is coming to their doorsteps?
Absolutely. And again, people say, why isn't China doing more? They simply aren't able to. That is just a reality. It is a real limitation. They're not all powerful. Russia is not all powerful. Iran is not all powerful. They are doing the best that they can with what they have. Again, people say, why didn't China intervene? China does not have the ability to project military. But we've talked about this many times before. Russia doesn't have the ability to project sufficient military power into the region. They tried in Syria and they failed. Iran itself attempted to project military power into Syria and it failed. And that was directly tied to their own self-preservation. That integrated air defense network in Syria was a layer of defense for Iran itself. And that was immediately eliminated when the Syrian government collapsed. And that was a prerequisite to launching these strikes. And that took place under the Biden administration, and it continues seamlessly under the Trump administration, again, continuity of agenda. So for China, what are they actually doing? Again, importing almost all of Iran's hydrocarbon exports. That is a significant boost to the Iranian economy. That is a huge help that we shouldn't play down. That is a massive amount of help China is offering Iran. Bringing it into BRICS is another step in that direction, creating that rail line from China all the way to Iran. This is a lifeline that the U.S. and its Navy are not going to be able to interdict. Although, I will warn, just as the U.S. has done all along the Belt and Road Initiative elsewhere, they will go into Central Asia, they will find extremist groups, and they will use them to attack these lines of logistics, just like they're doing in Pakistan. So they're doing a lot to help Iran. Russia is doing a lot to help Iran. A lot of the systems that Iran has developed are from Soviet or North Korean designs, and North Korean designs are based off of Soviet designs. Most of China's military equipment is a development from Soviet designs. So we have to understand that they all have been working together, helping each other, but there are realistic limits to what they can do. I hope that answers the question. Did I answer the question?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You answered it good, Brian. So, are we looking at a immediate break in the ceasefire with Iran? Because as you and I continue to say, and we'll say it ad nauseum, the empire is vying for time, and time is not on its side. So when you look at it, for them to take on China, they have to weaken Iran. They have to do that. So do you think that this pause will last long, or do you think that it will be violated very soon?
As soon as they're ready. I just don't know how long that will take. But if I were Iran, I would expect an attack at any moment. I would accept the reality that they are still conducting operations to undermine and collapse the Iranian government right now as we speak. That is a reality, and they need to understand that there's not going to be any reprieve from this. The U.S. is determined to do this. They have spent decades on this. President Trump lied to the American public while he was campaigning that he was going to end all of this. He's obviously enthusiastic about continuing all of it. And so they should just assume that they are in a constant state of war until the threat has been fully neutralized, until this push for empire is fully neutralized by the rise of multipolarism, which is going to take a long time and a lot of sacrifice by all of us. It's not going to be something that happens overnight.
And we see, as you just mentioned, that China is buying what, 70%, 75%, 80% of the oil coming out of
It's
Iran.
like 90. I think it's like 90%, something like that.
But Trump is taking credit for that. He says that that he allowed that if the United States would have put his foot down, that they could have stopped China from buying the oil. What is your thoughts on Trump taking credit for China buying the oil to help Iran's economy?
Something that we've been warning about for a long time are U.S. plans, again, in the policy papers, talking about interdicting Chinese maritime shipping, which would include hydrocarbons coming out of the Middle East going to China. And so him acting as if the U.S. is presiding over whether or not this maritime shipping takes place, that's actually a very dangerous concept that he's trying to introduce, because it means sometime in the future, maybe he won't be so gracious and he won't allow it. And how will that manifest itself? And what will China do in reaction to that? Because, again, even though the U.S. claims that China represents this global menace to peace, stability, and security, China is not able to project military power around the world in the same way the U.S. can. If the U.S. used its global spanning military to cut maritime shipping beyond the reach of China's military, which is within its own territory, what would China do? How would it stop the U.S. from interdicting maritime shipping? So we're talking about a really, really dangerous threat the U.S. is preparing and poses to Chinese maritime shipping worldwide. I've talked about how under the Biden administration, they transformed the entire U.S. Marine Corps to interdict maritime shipping, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. But these are tools that can be used to shut it down anywhere the U.S. Marine Corps goes. And this whole thing about seizing the Panama Canal and annexing Greenland, this is all about controlling maritime choke points. And the U.S. has its fleet in the South China Sea right now, threatening maritime shipping. Strait of Malacca. They have U.S. troops on the island province of Taiwan within internationally recognized Chinese territory. So they are threatening all of these choke points that China depends on to move its maritime shipping through. And so that's actually a very, very dangerous comment, a dangerous glimpse into the future plans of the U.S. vis-a-vis China and its maritime shipping, including hydrocarbons.
Before I ask the question that I want to ask you, I'll go. Carpe Diem says, Brian, do you think the Strait of Hormuz should be shut?
I saw that. I think ultimately in reality, this is going to hurt nations in the region and probably also China more than it'll hurt the United States. Honestly, just looking at it, that's the preliminary conclusion that I've reached. I think that's the reason why they didn't do it, because I don't think it's going to actually. What they could do though is a selective closure, just like Ansar Allah and Yemen did in the Red Sea. So not going to close it down and stop all shipping from going through it. They'll just any ship associated with the U.S. or any of its allies participating in hostilities against Iran, they will sink it, and that will create a dilemma. And that's something that they can hold in reserve for the next round of hostilities, which is almost inevitable.
Moffat Studio asks the question: will the U.S. public ever demand their tax dollars be spent at home on productive things rather than destructive ones?
Unfortunately, even if that's their desire, they have no real way of demanding it. There's no way for them to vote their way out of this. Obviously, a lot of people, I remember people, and Rashid, you remember people telling us, well, if it was Kamala Harris, there would be bombs dropping on Iran right now. Well, now there are bombs dropping on Iran with Trump. So it really made no difference, did it? And people are like, well, maybe it would have been nuclear war if Kamala Harris was president. Well, Trump still has 3.5 years to go. So don't sell him short. I think that's in the cards. It's a real possibility. So yes, U.S. tax dollars should be spent at home. People in America, I see this every day on social media. I'm sure you see it too, Rashid. You see people posting videos out of China that look like it's from a utopian sci-fi science fiction movie with grand cities. They literally have flying cars. They have the fastest, largest rail network on planet Earth in human history. And it looks something unbelievable. And Americans see it. And you see the same handful of reactions. It's AI, it's fake. No, that's literally what China looks like. Sorry if you can't accept that. Number two, they stole that from us. And number three, oh, well, they have that because it's a communist dictatorship when, so there's this line of reasoning that's not even possible. So the American interests have convinced the American people that you can't even have a decent society. It's impossible to have a decent society. The best that you can have is what America has right now, and this is just the way it has to be. And if you want what China has, you have to give something up. Give up what? Like what would you be giving up to have that? And they depend on American people being profoundly ignorant, so bad that China has relaxed its visa restrictions. Anyone can travel anywhere in China and see with their own eyes. And again, I have seen people say, come to China and see for yourself. And they'll still be arguing like, it's not true. It's not. Just go there and then see for yourself and then tell us it's not true. Take a video and show us how it's not true. So I mean, this is the thing. You could go on YouTube and just type in 4K walk or 4K drive and then the word China or even the word Iran or even the word Russia or Thailand or any of these countries that you're being lied to about. And you can see with your own eyes somebody, without editing it, for an hour, 2 hours. There's a video, or there's a couple of videos where they go from one side to China to the other. It's like a 15-hour video on YouTube, continuous, of them just driving across the country. You can see the cities, you can see the towns, you can see the countryside, you can see for yourself what it looks like. Stop depending on serial liars to tell you what other things are like outside of America. See it for yourself, and then ask yourself, why your government, why the special interests you take your paycheck and hand to every month, why they're denying this to you. What is the reason? What is the excuse? And I'm going to tell you, there is no reason. There is no excuse except for their greed and their selfishness and their disregard for you, your family, your friends, and your future.
And this is happening all across the global South with investment, and the leaders are getting fed up with the Western system. And you can see that in Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali. You can see it in Russia. I remember Larry Johnson said to me that when he went over to Russia, he was surprised how clean it was and how they had beautiful big metros and everything. And it was just a contrast to what we see over here with all of the graffiti, rats in the trash cans, and it's amazing. So we're seeing the rise of the global South and the decline of the West. But let's go back for a minute, Brian, to the war between Iran and Israel for a second. I was looking at something, and this comes from Middle Eastern Eye, and it says that the defense, and it's talking about Israel. Defense spending in 2025 has already exceeded the state-approved budget, reaching between 20 and 30 billion shekels, following the escalation with Iran and the ongoing war in Gaza, according to the Marker, the economic section of Haaretz. It says the Ministry of Defense projected that expenses will rise by an additional 25 to 30 billion shekels in 2026. As a result, Israel's budget deficit in the first 5 months of 2025 was 15.9 billion shekels, or $4.56 billion. So the United States and the UK and the EU are responsible for the injection of money into the Israeli economy. It would have already tanked. How can they maintain this and continue to go to war? I'm talking about the United States. How can you continue to allocate money to Israel and continue to reach your tentacles out? How can Britain do the same? And how can Israel continue to fight these wars when it is essentially bankrupt and dependent on the United States and in the UK and the EU, which are dependent on the gratuity of the global South? It's insane.
Yes. Well, look, the United States, it's unsustainable, but people have been predicting the financial and economic collapse of the U.S. for decades, and it just hasn't come because people have to understand all economies are much more resilient than I think people imagine. And I would say don't count on the U.S. economy collapsing. That is not going to be the thing that stops U.S. hegemony around the world. It will literally be the multipolar world creating the conditions around the world where the U.S. is just no more able to interfere in these countries. When they finally start working together to stop U.S. interference through the National Endowment for Democracy, through USAID, which all still exist. There was an article where President Trump was rehiring all the Doge cuts. Remember Doge and how he's dismantling the deep state? Well, he's rehiring them all. It was all a bait and switch. It was all a joke. It was all just to trick Americans into going along with this and buying into it. Creating the conditions in which no matter how much money the U.S. prints back at home, they're just physically incapable of interfering and threatening these countries anymore by just making multipolarism that much more stronger than the United States. That's what's going to do it. So don't count on economic collapse as being the Achilles heel that finally undoes American imperialism. And this is another piece of evidence demonstrating how Israel depends entirely on the United States. Everything it does, it's all of its military capabilities, its economic, financial viability, political stability, the political regime in power right now, installed into power, backed by the US, to make sure no one else comes in and derails these policies, that they have these belligerent, self-destructive policies. It's because I always have people tell me Israel's running the United States. With what leverage? If the U.S. pulled the plug on any one of these aspects of support for Israel, it would disappear overnight, just like Ukraine would. And just like Ukraine, the U.S. doesn't care about its self-preservation ultimately. It wants to keep it together to achieve a specific goal. But if it can't, it's perfectly fine with letting it just completely be destroyed. And so this applies to all proxies. Israel is not an exception to this. And you can see it. You can see the devastation wrought by these ballistic missiles Iran launched in defense against the war of aggression the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran. You can see the destruction. You can see the financial and economic cost, the human cost, the political cost, the masks slipping off of Israel and the United States. You could see all of these costs mounting. And again, if the U.S. was really beholden to Israel, it would have been the U.S. paying all of these costs, not Israel itself. It would have been the U.S. catching ballistic missiles all across the region with the Israelis high and dry watching it unfold. So we have to keep all of this in mind. When you have a preconceived notion and you see information coming out, you need to ask yourself, is this actual information? Is this is this an actual fact? Is this real, or is this just something I wish was real to support my preconceived notions? Is this really the truth, or is this something that I just wish was true? We have to start asking ourselves that question. If more people asked themselves that question before President Trump even stepped foot into office, they wouldn't have been tricked by him in the first place. And so I think this is a really important lesson that we've all learned. And for me and for you, Rashid, a lesson we've tried desperately to teach. And I hope that from this point onward, nobody continues to fall for these tricks.
So let's visit the Ukrainian conflict for a minute. What is going on the front lines, and what is going on between the U.S. and NATO?
So as we've been covering for the last 3 years, Russian forces, its military capabilities continue to expand in terms of manpower, in terms of military capabilities, in terms of military industrial production for producing these capabilities. While as for Ukraine, they have a manpower crisis that just continues to get worse and worse. And this is what we've been talking about for a couple of years now. When you are losing more people than you can replace, and the losses reach a certain scale, you are, even if you can find enough people to replace one for one all of your losses, you do not have the time to train them properly. It could take a half a year or more to train an entry-level infantryman or some of the specialized skills required alongside infantry out on the battlefield: air defenses, artillery, rockets, missiles, reconnaissance, intelligence, all of these different things that have to work together in combined arms warfare on the battlefield. It could take a year or more to just train the entry level soldiers required, saying nothing of the non-commissioned officers and officers required to lead these military units, saying nothing of creating a brigade of, say, 4,000 men with all the subunits and leadership of all of those subunits and the leadership of the brigade itself. So this is something that they had tried to do for seven or 8 years before the special military operation was launched. They tried to stand up new brigades, and they probably had time to do it somewhat effectively, but all of those brigades were destroyed during the initial phase of the special military operation. They tried to rebuild brigades afterwards, after the 2020, before the 2023 offensive, and after that, and it's just impossible. You cannot build a brigade, which is the basic unit that they're using to fight on the battlefield. You cannot rebuild a brigade. It could take between a year and 3 years, and that's if you have additional manpower to draw from to build a brigade. They don't have that additional manpower. So they are facing a war of attrition that they are inevitably going to lose. It's just a matter of how long can they keep this going. And that's why they're spending 5% of their GDP on military spending to try to keep this going for as long as possible. That was always the goal. If you read the 2019 Rand Corporation paper, Extending Russia, they talk all about how this is going to raise the cost for Russia. It could overextend Russia. It's obviously keeping them locked into Ukraine. It prevented them from saving Syria. It's preventing them from providing war aid to Iran. But ultimately, Ukraine is going to be destroyed in the process. They admit that in the 2019 policy paper, and that's what we see happening. So that's where we are. That's the process that we're watching unfold right now in Ukraine.
Do you think Russia will take all of Ukraine?
This is hard to say. I would say right now it is pretty clear that they're probably going to take almost everything up to the Dnieper River and possibly Odessa and maybe even Kiev on the west side of the Dnieper River at a minimum. I don't think they actually do need to take anything beyond that, because then what is left of Ukraine is landlocked, has no access to the Black Sea, and it has no resources, and it's just this dysfunctional burden that Europe is going to have to take care of and deal with. So we'll have to see. I think ideally, yes, they should, if they could. I'm not sure that they can, because again, we have to remember Russia is not all powerful either.
But to leave a rump Ukraine, even if it's unviable as an economically, I should say, would leave a foothold for the United States to place missiles and use that part as a battering ram and as a provocateur against Russia on a constant basis. So Russia is kind of caught between the catch-22 to go up past the Dnieper or whatever. Do you think that they will allow that to happen?
Will NATO allow, the U.S. and NATO allow that to happen, or
No,
will Russia allow that
will
foothold?
Will Russia allow the U.S. because they see what the U.S. is doing right now? And Russia, if Russia takes Odessa and up to the Dnieper, and some people are saying even Kiev. Do you think that Russia would be satisfied with that and allow Ukraine to be some kind of rump state, which could be used against Russia by NATO to place missiles in that rump state as a provocateur against Russia on a constant basis, and we'll be right back where we are right now if they allow that to happen? So do you think Russia would allow that?
I think ideally they would like to take all of Ukraine. It's just a matter of whether they can or not, and then they're going to have to think of what to do in the event that takes place. But what would be left of Ukraine at that point would be so diminished, the population so depleted, its military capabilities. Yes, they could put missiles and they could still use it as a way of attacking Russia. But if Russia were able to take all of that territory up to that point, and I think continuing the war and degrading the capabilities within that rump state that is left, I think it would be a much more manageable proposition than it is right now. Because right now, we just, relatively recently, we saw U.S., NATO-backed and armed Ukrainian troops storm into what is indisputably Russian territory, the Kursk incursion. And so that is something that they must immediately stop from happening. They must create a buffer zone to prevent that from happening. And then they'll just keep doing this process. I think for Russia, as things are right now, it's sustainable. And for the collective West, less so.
Suzette Lundberg says Poland wants the West back. If that's all that's left, Poland will try to take the land. But that would open up a whole can of worms, because then Germany would want part of its land back from Poland, and we will see Hungary wanting part of their land back. So this will.
Did Rashid just? Well, we'll wait for Rashid to come back. I don't see him in the comment section. Can people let me know if you hear or see Rashid? I don't see him. Are we still live? Can you tell me in the comment section? Are we? I think he's coming back.
Piss people off. I guess we pissed some people off.
Okay.
They threw me out of my own studio.
Yeah, it happens. I've with Zoom, it's even worse and happens more often. Now I have to try to remember what I was gonna say. What were you just saying, Rashid? Do you remember?
Yes, I remember. If Poland tries to grab back his land,
oh yes. Yes, yes.
Germany would go ahead and elaborate. Germany would want his land. Hungary would want his land.
Well, actually, that would be ideal. Whatever is left of this rump state of Ukraine, if these European nations under the Article 5 protection of NATO, if they were to all take that, then that would just be a line between NATO and Russia, which is already the case in the Baltic region and with the Nordic nations all joining NATO. So that would be a way to fully resolve it. What you don't want is a rump Ukrainian state that they can still use as a proxy, still maintain plausible deniability, still carry out attacks through. If Poland were to host missiles and launch them at Russia, then Russia could justify going to war with Poland and dismantling the Polish state, or these Baltic nations that are, very obviously next in line for hostilities towards Russia. So we just have to wait and see. Again, the U.S., because, again, this is the U.S. feeding all of Europe into the wood chipper of proxy war, not the U.S. itself. It's on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And so they have no reason not to continue this at the cost of everyone in Europe until people in Europe say enough is enough. And I don't think that they're going to. I mean, they've allowed it to go on this long. And if history is any guide, look at what happened to Germany, Nazi Germany. They allowed it to continue going on until almost the country was dismantled to the last brick. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. This is what we're wasting our time and our energy on. Right now, we have technology that offers the possibility for a truly utopian future. Instead, our greed and short-sightedness is shaping a dystopian reality.
$5 super chat from Moffat Studios. He says, "Thanks, Brian and Rashid. Thank you, Brian. I think the United States is willing to sacrifice all of them because they, in their mind, if they can use everyone else as a battering ram, that weakens everybody else, and that gives the empire a better standing to continue its reign as the global hegemon." Do you think that's their main thinking when they're dealing with Europe and Africa and Latin America and all of these other nations that they're using as battering rams?
Absolutely, because it's not that they just want these nations they call adversaries to be ground down and kept helpless and destitute. They want the entire planet in destitution, because that is how empire presides. It presides over divided, weak, destroyed subjects that cannot rise up, that cannot compete, that cannot contest their control. The U.S. is a tiny percentage, like 4 or 5% of the whole global world population. The only way they can maintain primacy over the rest of the planet is to keep the whole planet divided, distracted, and destitute, which is why a unipolar world order is counterproductive to every single human being's best interests on Earth, except for the tiny percentage benefiting from the system. Americans are not benefiting from it. Europeans certainly are not benefiting from it. And no one else beyond the West is benefiting from it. Just this tiny little small handful of people. So, and then this is the thing I don't get, is people in the West who eagerly serve this agenda, and they're not getting anything out of it at all, except feeding into this sociopathic mindset that the establishment has created in them deliberately in the first place. So it's very sad. I agree. They don't want a strong Europe any more than they want a strong Russia. They don't want any nation with a strong independence nation state. They don't want that. So they're gonna, pitting them against each other and having them destroy each other suits them just well, as it has empire all throughout human history.
As we wind this down, Brian, what are your thoughts on what's going on in Moldova and also in Armenia and Azerbaijan? Because there's a lot of information that Azerbaijan allowed Israeli drones to fly over to strike Iran. And why didn't Iran retaliate?
Yes, they've been setting this up for years and years and years, and it's because it's not really an Israeli proxy. It is a U.S. proxy that they're allowing Israel to utilize. So this is why, and you have to understand, Iran does not want to start multiple wars along its borders while it's being attacked by the U.S. Through Israel. So they're focusing on the easiest argument to make, which is shooting missiles at Israel. Every time they shot one missile at Israel, Israel had to launch at least 2 interceptors to intercept it. As we've talked about for years now, there's a shortage in Western air defense systems. This is an essential capability they will need in any war they fight with China. And every time they start a conflict that begins depleting huge numbers, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of interceptors, that's going to take them years to rebuild that arsenal that they just spent in just that 2 weeks of fighting. So that was part of the calculation. We have to understand, it's okay. They're using this country as supposedly they're using this country as a vector to attack us. Emotionally, you want revenge against all of these people that have betrayed you and are working against you. But in reality, you have to be strategic and think about how to raise the cost highest, at the lowest cost to yourself, and striking back at Israel, who did strike Iran directly first. That was the most viable option. We also saw Iran strike the U.S. airbase in Qatar. And this was, people say it was pointless because you didn't do any real damage. But what they did do is take the political limit off of themselves from striking at nations hosting U.S. troops. That limit is now gone. Now they can go back and do that anytime of their choosing. Just like Israel and the U.S. can now strike Iran anytime they want without really having to justify it because they removed the political limit. Iran has done the same thing, striking back at U.S. troops all across the region.
And whether this put in closing, whether this put the so-called rules-based order, whether this put the United Nations relevancy or irrelevancy, where are we now in this?
Well, it exposes these international institutions, especially the IAEA. It exposes them and the treaties that these international organizations are responsible for enforcing, like the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It exposes these all as simply tools of U.S. aggression. They're not tools of peace and stability around the world. They are tools that are maliciously used to dismantle peace and stability around the globe. So it just makes a much more compelling argument for multipolarism versus this US-led international order we keep hearing about that is nothing but disorder. And so I think they're making the case against themselves every time they do this. But as we have pointed out, they're in a rush. They have no more time. They're desperate. They're dangerous. They're taking shortcuts. And as we all know, there are no shortcuts in life. When you take these shortcuts, it always ends up costing you in the long run. And I think that's what we're watching. It's going to require the patience and perseverance of the rest of the world. All of us in our own individual way can contribute to multipolarism. And it's something as simple as, instead of buying an iPhone, buy Huawei or Xiaomi or something like that. Take your money that you're spending on, say, Netflix or some big corporate media company and give Rashida super chat, help the alternative media out, start investing in alternatives to the unipolar world order. That is what multipolarism is. That is already making a major difference. That is shifting the balance of power globally. We can all do our small part in helping. That's why I do what I do. I tell you privately, Rashid, and I think people who have watched me for a long time know that I actually hate doing geopolitical analysis. I only do it because I do not want my adopted home of the Kingdom of Thailand burned to the ground. The U.S. has tried on multiple occasions. I have witnessed myself war weapons by U.S.-backed opposition groups used in the streets. I've seen buildings that I used to walk in with friends and family burned to the ground by U.S.-backed opposition. There's a war raging next door in Myanmar where people are coming out of into Thailand. We see them here in our communities. So it's a very personal, very urgent matter for me personally. And if this is what's happening to me here, I can only imagine what people in, say, the Donbas region were suffering before Russia launched a special military operation, or the people in Iran are suffering, the people in Palestine, unimaginable suffering. I've just got a tiny taste of it. They're living it to the maximum every single day of their existence, trapped in it. We all have to do it, even if it's something we don't want to do. It's something we have to do. We all have to do our part. And I want to thank you, Rashid, for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to reach out to more people with this message.
And I'm glad you came on, because it's a blessing to me and it's a blessing to those, because Brian, you're always on point with everything, and I really appreciate it. And we give each other flowers while we're here. And so I want to thank you, Brian, for joining me. Stay on as we end the show. I want to thank everybody who's listening to the show. And as I always close out, I always have to say this: do right by others, not because there's some material gain behind it or because some accolades are involved. Do right because it's the right, humane, and godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, God Almighty is watching. And as my mom always says, he sits high, but he looks low. And I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Peace. We're out of here.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost.